when everything felt out of control. Maybe it was an argument that came out of nowhere, a failure you didn't see coming, a loss that shook the ground beneath you. And in that moment, your mind didn't pause, it didn't reflect, it spiraled, it catastrophized, it replayed the same thought again and again, as if thinking about it harder would somehow fix it. Now ask yourself an honest question. What if the event itself wasn't the real source of your pain? What if the way your mind responded to it, the story you told, the spiral you entered, the control you surrendered, what if that was where the suffering actually began? Most people move through life believing their struggles come from bad luck, difficult people, or an unkind world. And sometimes that's partially true. But beneath those explanations lies something quieter and more honest, a lack of mental discipline. Not intelligence, not effort, discipline of mind. What you are about to hear isn't a list of motivational tips. It isn't positive thinking dressed up in ancient clothing. These are 9 operating instructions for the human mind, tested not in lecture halls, but in war rooms, prison cells, and deathbeds, by men who had every reason to fall apart and chose not to. 2,000 years ago, a man named Marcus Aurelius sat alone each morning in the most powerful position in the known world and wrote to himself, not to be remembered, not to be published. He wrote because he needed to remind himself how to think, how to respond, how to remain human while governing an empire. Around the same time, a man named Epictetus was born into slavery. He owned nothing. He controlled nothing, not even his own body. And yet, by the time he died, emperors were studying his words because Epictetus had mastered something that power and wealth could not buy: complete inner freedom. And then there was Seneca, a writer, a statesman, a man who stared at his own death and met it with more composure than most people manage on an ordinary Tuesday. These were the Stoics. And they were not teaching people how to become monks or philosophers. They were teaching people, soldiers, leaders, ordinary men and women, how to think clearly in a world that never stops trying to destabilize you. Today, that world is louder than ever. Notifications compete for your attention. Social media builds quiet wars in the mind. The pace of modern life has made distraction the default state of being. And somewhere in all of that noise, you have likely lost the thread back to yourself. Stoicism was never about suppressing emotion. The Stoics felt deeply. They grieved, they loved, they feared. But they understood something that most people never stop long enough to learn. Not every thought deserves to govern your life. Not every feeling is a truth. Not every reaction is wisdom.
The 9 rules ahead are not about becoming a different person. They are about remembering who you actually are beneath the noise. Each one targets a specific weakness in the human mind: reactivity, fear, ego, attachment, distraction. And each one offers something rare in the modern world, a path back to clarity. The Stoics did not teach men how to escape suffering. They taught them how to stop creating it. The first and most fundamental rule is this: control only what is yours to control. Epictetus opened his most famous work, the Enchiridion, with a single world-altering observation. Some things are in our power, he wrote, and some are not. Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, these are ours. Everything else, the opinions of others, our reputation, our health, the outcomes of our efforts, these are not. It sounds simple. It is not. Think of the professional lying awake at 2 in the morning, mentally rehearsing a conversation with their boss about a promotion that hasn't been decided yet. They are running through every possible scenario, crafting responses to objections that may never be raised, losing sleep over a decision being made by someone else in a room they are not in, about a future that hasn't happened. This is what Epictetus called confusing what is ours with what is not, and it is, without question, the single greatest source of unnecessary human suffering. Here's the mindset shift the Stoics offer. The moment you stop trying to control what is outside your reach, you suddenly have far more energy to direct toward what is within it. Your response, your effort, your character, your discipline. These are yours. They were always yours, and no circumstance, no other person, no outcome can take them from you. This is not passivity, it is the opposite. It is radical precision of focus, spending your energy only where it can actually make a difference, and releasing everything else without guilt. But there is something even closer to home than the external world, something that most people never think to question because it feels so natural, so immediate, so obviously true. Their own emotions. The second rule the Stoics lived by was this: never be a prisoner of your own emotions. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively in his private journals about the discipline of not reacting immediately to an impression. He trained himself to pause, not to suppress the feeling, but to examine it before allowing it to drive his behavior. He called this the pause between stimulus and response. Think about the last time you received harsh criticism, a sharp message, a dismissive comment in public. In that first fraction of a second, your body reacted before your mind had a chance to think. Shame, anger, defensiveness flooding through you like a wave. That first response is not your wisdom speaking. It is biology. It is the part of you shaped by survival, by threat detection, by ancient instincts that have not yet caught up with the modern world. The Stoic insight is this: you are not required to obey your first reaction. The feeling is real, it is valid, but it is not automatically true, and it does not have to govern what you do next.
The philosophical pause, that deliberate gap between what happens and how you respond, is not repression. It is the highest form of personal power. It is the moment when an animal reaction becomes a human choice. And if you look carefully at that first emotional reaction, you will notice something else happening, something the Stoics called the distortion of perception. The third rule is to see things as they are, not as you fear them. Marcus Aurelius practiced what he called stripping an impression bare. He would take a thought, an event, a feeling, and force himself to describe only what was factually present without the layer of meaning his mind had automatically added. He wrote about this in relation to food, to status, to power, stripping away the drama until only the plain truth remained. Consider someone who sends a job application and then hears nothing back for a week. Within days, their mind has constructed an entire narrative. They were rejected. They weren't good enough. Everyone saw through them. Their future is closing. But the bare fact is this: they have not received a response yet. That's all that has actually happened. Anxiety does not live in reality. It lives in the story you layer on top of reality. The Stoics knew this with extraordinary clarity. They understood that the mind, left unchecked, is a storytelling machine, and that the stories it tells are often far darker than the truth. The practice is simple, though not easy. When a difficult thought arrives, name the bare fact first. Describe what has actually occurred without interpretation. Then, and only then, decide how to respond. But what about the things that actually are difficult? The losses that are real, the failures that cannot be explained away, the hardships that arrive without warning and refuse to leave. This is where the Stoics offered their most radical and counterintuitive wisdom. The fourth rule: love what happens to you. The Latin phrase is amor fati, a love of fate. Not a resigned tolerance of what cannot be changed, not the forced optimism of someone pretending everything is fine, but a genuine, deliberate embrace of life exactly as it arrives, including its pain, its loss, and its uncertainty. Marcus Aurelius ruled during plague, during war, during the deaths of children. He had every reason, by any human measure, to spend his life in grief and bitterness. Instead, he returned again and again in his private writings to the same idea. This is what has been given to me. What will I do with it? Think of someone who loses a job they held for a decade. The first response is devastation, then anger, then a long, low season of bitterness, replaying the injustice, resenting the people involved, wishing the story had gone differently. Years later, that same person often looks back and realizes the loss was the turning point. It forced a reinvention they never would have chosen. It led to something better or truer or more genuinely theirs than anything they would have found by staying comfortable. The Stoic insight is not that hardship is secretly good. It is that resistance to hardship is always costly and sometimes fatal to the life you could have built. Amor fati is the most courageous act available to a human being, saying yes to life exactly as it is and finding within that acceptance the energy to move forward.
There is one more human habit that quietly destroys more lives than almost any other. It hides in plain sight. It masquerades as ambition, as patience, as the responsible deferral of pleasure for a better future. It is the belief that time is infinite. The fifth rule is to live as if today is enough. Seneca, writing more than 2,000 years ago, observed something that feels startlingly modern. It is not that we have little time, it is that we waste so much of what we have. People do not live, he wrote, they merely exist, waiting for life to begin after the next milestone, the next achievement, the next version of themselves that they have not yet become. The Stoic practice of Memento Mori, the deliberate remembrance of death, was not designed to produce fear. It was designed to produce clarity, to burn away the trivial and reveal what actually matters. Think about your own life. Are there relationships you keep meaning to invest in? A passion that has been waiting for the right moment for years? An internal monologue that quietly whispers someday, as if someday were a real destination on a real calendar. When you truly internalize that this day may be the last of its kind, not as a theoretical concept, but as a felt reality, something shifts. The trivial becomes instantly visible. The things you have been tolerating but shouldn't become harder to ignore, and the things you have been postponing become suddenly urgent in the most peaceful way. You don't need to become obsessed with mortality. You simply need to take it seriously enough to stop living as though you have an unlimited supply of tomorrows. And while the modern world pushes you to care deeply about how you appear to others, the Stoics insisted on something far more durable. The sixth rule, your character is your only true reputation. Epictetus, a man who was enslaved, who had no social standing, no image to protect, no platform to manage, developed a philosophy that the most powerful men in Rome sought out because he understood something that status and perception can never teach. The only thing that actually defines a person is what they choose when no one is watching. Think about your own life. Are there relationships you keep meaning to invest in? A passion that has been waiting for the right moment for years? An internal monologue that quietly whispers someday as if someday were a real destination on a real calendar? When you truly internalize that this day may be the last of its kind, not as a theoretical concept, but as a felt reality, something shifts. The trivial becomes instantly visible. The things you have been tolerating but shouldn't become harder to ignore. And the things you have been postponing become suddenly urgent in the most peaceful way. You don't need to become obsessed with mortality.
You simply need to take it seriously enough to stop living as though you have an unlimited supply of tomorrows. And while the modern world pushes you to care deeply about how you appear to others, the Stoics insisted on something far more durable. The sixth rule: your character is your only true reputation. Epictetus, a man who was enslaved, who had no social standing, no image to protect, no platform to manage, developed a philosophy that the most powerful men in Rome sought out because he understood something that status and perception can never teach. The only thing that actually defines a person is what they choose when no one is watching. Think about the energy you have spent managing how others perceive you. The decisions reversed under social pressure, not because new information arrived, but because the fear of disapproval became louder than your own judgment. The opinions performed rather than held, the authentic response swallowed to maintain the comfortable one. The Stoics were unambiguous on this point. What other people think of you is not within your control, and anything outside your control is, by Stoic definition, none of your business. This is not indifference to others. It is a reorientation of where you invest your integrity. The Stoics measured a life not by what others remembered at the end of it, but what the person chose, moment by moment, when no audience was present. Build that person. The rest follows, or it doesn't, and either way, you remain whole. There is one habit the Stoics practiced that strikes modern people as almost absurd until they understand its purpose. The seventh rule: practice voluntary discomfort.
Clothing, ate the simplest food, and slept without the comforts his wealth could easily have provided. He was not punishing himself, he was training himself. He wanted to know, not theoretically, but in his body and his mind, that if the worst arrived, he would not fall apart. Consider the modern professional who has gradually engineered every inconvenience out of their life. Food arrives at the door. The commute is gone. Entertainment is endless and instant. Every edge of discomfort has been smoothed away. And yet, paradoxically, they find themselves increasingly anxious, increasingly fragile, increasingly unable to cope with ordinary setbacks. Because the mind that has never been tested does not know its own strength. It lives in constant low-level dread of the difficulty it has never faced. The Stoics understood that voluntary hardship is a form of inoculation. When you choose discomfort regularly, when you fast, when you exercise beyond comfort, when you sit with boredom instead of reaching for distraction, you are not suffering unnecessarily. You are building the proof that you can handle what life sends. And when you carry that proof in your body, fear loses most of its power over you. The Stoics also noticed something about the way people use language and the extraordinary damage done by words spoken before thought. The eighth rule: speak less, observe more. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, is said to have reflected that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that the ratio is instructive. Not because silence is sacred, but because listening, real, patient, unhurried listening, is one of the rarest and most powerful things a human being can offer. Most modern conflict, most lasting regret, most broken trust does not originate in what happened to us. It originates in what we said in response, before we had finished thinking. Think about a moment when words left your mouth before wisdom had a chance to review them. In a heated meeting, in a relationship under pressure, in a comment posted online in a moment of frustration, and the days spent afterward managing consequences that could have been avoided with 10 more seconds of silence. The Stoics did not view silence as absence, they viewed it as action.
the active choice to observe before concluding, to understand before responding, to speak only what is true and only what is necessary. In a world that rewards performance and punishes reflection, this is not weakness, it is the quiet mastery of the most underestimated human faculty. And finally, perhaps the most dangerous trap of modern life, one that wears the costume of virtue, that gets celebrated in productivity culture and praised by peers. The 9th rule: never mistake motion for progress. Seneca was direct. Most people, he wrote, are not short on time, they are short on purpose. They fill their hours with activity, responding to messages at midnight, optimizing systems that don't matter, tracking metrics that have no bearing on anything they actually care about, and they mistake that motion for meaning.
Marcus Aurelius commanded an empire and still found time to reflect, to rest, to write. He was not lazy, but he was ruthlessly intentional. Every action he took was quietly measured against a single question: does this serve my highest purpose, or does it merely serve my restlessness? The person who is always busy is often running from something. The stillness they avoid is the very place where clarity lives, because it is only in stillness that the important question can finally be heard. What is all of this actually for? The goal has never been to do more. The goal is to do what matters, fully, deliberately, without apology, and to release what doesn't, without the guilt of someone who mistakes effort for wisdom. These 9 rules are not a curriculum. They're not a self-improvement checklist. They are, taken together, a portrait of a certain kind of person, someone who moves through the world with steadiness rather than speed, with intention rather than reaction, with a quiet confidence that doesn't depend on outcomes they cannot control. And here is what the Stoics would want you to know about all of this. They failed too. Marcus Aurelius did not write the Meditations as a published philosophy. He wrote them as private reminders, notes to himself on the days when he forgot, when the anger rose faster than the pause, when the fear was louder than the reason, when the ego showed up uninvited. He was not writing for history, he was writing to stay honest with himself. That is perhaps the most human thing about Stoicism. It does not promise transformation. It does not promise that you will one day arrive at a place of perfect equanimity. It asks only that you return again and again to these ideas, and that each time you return, you bring a little more of yourself with you. Stoicism is not a system you adopt. It is a self you return to. You don't need to begin with all 9 rules today. You don't need to overhaul your thinking overnight. Pick one, the one that landed most honestly when you heard it, the one that felt less like new information and more like something you already knew, somewhere beneath the noise. Start there. Before you go, hold on to this. You cannot control what the world gives you. The losses will come, the criticism will arrive, the plans will fall apart, the people you love will disappoint you, and you will disappoint them in return. Life will be, in many ways, exactly as difficult as you feared. But you can decide every single day, in every ordinary moment, the kind of person who receives it. That decision is yours. It has always been yours, and no circumstance has ever had the power to take it from you. If something in this conversation resonated with you, leave it in the comments. Which rule struck you most deeply? Which one are you going to carry with you? The conversation that happens in those comments is often as valuable as anything said here. And if you want to return to this kind of thinking regularly, not as a habit, but as a practice, consider subscribing, because this is the kind of wisdom that deserves more than one visit. Take care of your mind. It is the only home you will ever truly live in.